NetSparker, the developers of a comprehensive automated web security platform that includes web vulnerability scanning, assessment, and management. NetSparker's desktop and cloud-based security solutions employ a unique and dead-accurate vulnerability scanning engine that automatically verifies vulnerabilities and provides a proof of concept. For more information, visit them on the web at securityweekly.com/NetSparker. Qualys has brought together vulnerability management and patch management, letting security teams discover vulnerabilities and apply patches immediately, all within a single, unified app. Sign up for a free trial of Qualys VMDR, vulnerability management, detection, and response today at securityweekly.com/Qualys. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Make sure you join the Security Weekly mailing list even. You can get announcements about our upcoming webcasts and virtual trainings in all things Security Weekly, as well as an invitation to our Discord server by visiting securityweekly.com/subscribe. Arrested at 17 while hacking with a Commodore 64, Terry Dunlap went on to work for the U.S. National Security Agency to help track terrorists. He left NSA in 2007 to bootstrap Tactical Network Solutions, something that you may recognize from interviews we did long ago with Craig Hefner and Zachary Cutlip. An offensive-focused cyber company catering to the world's friendly foreign governments and militaries. Today, he heads up ReFirm Labs. Terry, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Paul. How's everything going on your end?
It's going fantastic. And Terry, I love talking to you and people in this space because it's so cool, and there's not a lot of people actually doing what you're doing because it's so nuanced, but so awesome and fun to talk about. So
awesome. Well, I appreciate being on the show. It's kind of by accident how Tactical Network Solutions started and how ReFirm was actually spun out of that. I mean,
well, Terry, I think maybe explain what happened when you were 17 as much as you're willing to share, because I read that little snippet and how did you get your start? I'm sure that was some of your beginnings, right?
Yeah. 17 years old, 1985, Commodore 64, 300 baud dial-up modem. What we would do as kids who worked at local restaurants is at night we would go out to the local mall, local restaurants, and do dumpster diving. And for those youngins that don't know what dumpster diving is, you're actually going into dumpsters, ripping open bags, looking for goodies. And what we were looking for back in the day were carbons to credit card transactions. So if you're old enough to remember, before what we have today for point of sale systems, they actually manually ran the credit card through a hand swipe system that created carbon copies.
It made a very specific noise, right?
You're getting really close to talking PCI,
right?
But throwing out a warning.
There was that ka-chunking noise.
Ka-chunk.
Exactly.
We call it a knuckle buster.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that merchants would actually verify whether or not a card was valid or stolen is they got in the mail every month a very thick, long book that you had to flip through to look up the actual full card number to see if it was valid. If you didn't have that book, there was a toll-free number you called, which sent you to the merchant, and you provide a merchant number, and they'd tell you whether or not it was valid.
Yep.
So we would collect those carbons. We'd go back at night. We'd piece them together. We'd actually log into the well out in California, bulletin board system. We'd upload the credit card numbers that we found in Ohio, and then we would download credit card numbers that we got in California. So when we use those credit cards for transactions, stupid stuff that 17-year-old kids would buy, like ordering fireworks or ordering additional disk drives for the Commodore 64 or maybe a color monitor, that type of stuff. What ended up happening was one of the kids that was working with me, one of my buddies, decided to try and do this all on his own. So what he ended up doing was striking a deal with the renters of a next door neighbor. And he offered this renter power tools if he would accept UPS packages that came to the main address at the house. And the main house was vacated because the husband that owned it had died and the widow had moved elsewhere. So she came to the house one time and saw the yellow UPS sticker on the door and called UPS and said, "I didn't order anything. There must be a mistake." And they said, "No, we've been delivering packages there for weeks." And so that caused some concern. UPS got involved. The police got involved. They staked out the house. They delivered a package. And what do you know? The next door neighbor kid came over, my buddy, picked it up, went back to his house. Cops knocked on the door. Can we come in? Sure. No warrant, nothing, but he let him in. And they found all these the packages and merchandise that had been acquired via stolen credit cards. And he happened to actually keep a journal of exactly what happened and used everybody's real names.
They always get you through the bookkeeper.
The bookkeeper. Yep.
Yep. So it was the following day after his arrest. I'm sitting in calculus class, and there's a knock on the door from the assistant principal. And he says, "Sorry for the interruption, Mr. Taylor," the teacher. He goes, "But I'd like to see Terry down in the office." So, okay, I get up, I start to motion or walk towards him, and he goes, "Bring your books. You won't be coming back." Then I knew something was wrong. And as soon as I walk down around the corner to the principal's office, I see my mom and I see a cop in the principal's office.
Not a good scene.
And they take me out to the car, throw me in the back seat. There's my computer, my disk drives, all my computer gear in the back seat. My mom's yelling at me, "What the hell were you doing? What were you effing thinking? Blah, blah, blah." So I go to the
Kind of
police
reminds me of
station.
Joey in the movie Hackers. Now you're recreating that scene in my mind.
I think in my movie script version of this, he's going to get hit with the AP Calc book, though. The police are going to be like, "Give it up! Give it up!"
So I end up going to the police station. I see what I thought was my buddy Tony sitting there, and somebody else that he recruited to do the same thing. I didn't even know who the other dude was. He wasn't part of what I was involved with, but apparently Tony recruited him. We end up going to juvenile detention for about 5 days before we actually got hauled in front of a judge. And I kid you not, it scared the living shit out of me, okay? I'm a white guy, kid, in juvenile detention with a bunch of minorities who were busted for carjacking, drugs, breaking and entering, assault and battery. And here are a bunch of honor students, white guys.
I have to interject at this point, though, because there's an old saying, always be afraid of the white guy in jail, because he really did it.
He's the cannibal. Yeah.
Carry on.
So, we end up in juvenile detention. And then, I didn't think whatever crime we committed was really that bad. And what they did to us as an example is when they sent us to court, they actually chained us at the ankles like a chain gang and led us into the courtroom, which I thought was kind of overkill.
That's standard.
But you got to remember that, this is 1985. We were doing some phone hacking as well. The only thing they could really get us for, since there were no computer crime laws on the books at the time, we're 1985, so we're a year away from the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act of 86. The only thing they could get us for was credit card fraud. And for a bunch of teenagers who've never been in trouble before, they were pretty lenient, gave us 3 years probation, and basically told us never to touch computers during that 3-year probation. Well, I'm a few months away from college. You think I'm not going to touch a computer to help write a term paper or something? That's ridiculous. So that was the trials and tribulations of a 17-year-old back in Midwest Ohio.
And the NSA still let you work there after.
Yeah.
all,
So
right?
fast forward to 2001. Okay. Now, as weird as this sounds, this is the honest to God truth. So I'm actually at a SANS conference in Baltimore, and I'm in a Starbucks line, and I see a woman. I never met her before, and she's got how the SANS badges are. It's just first name and where you work. And I saw her first name and said DOD, and I said, man, it'd be fucking awesome to work for you guys at the DOD. You're under constant attack. That would be spectacular, a great training ground. So we got to talk, and she said, send me your resume. We're always looking for good people. So about 3 months later, after that interaction, I get an email from her saying, hey, you might get a call from the recruiting office here. Just want to give you a heads up that they're still interested. So I said, okay. But, I figured it was the Defense Department. And instead, I get a call from this recruiter who blatantly says he's with the National Security Agency. Do you have time for a phone interview? And I was like, holy cripe. Yeah, sure. So
What I do now?
So I passed the phone interview, and they send me all my flight arrangements and hotel information to come out for an in-person interview. I'm on my way to the airport that day, and my wife calls me and says, "Are you sure your interview's still on today?" It's like, well, yeah, sure. I'm on my way to the airport right now. Why do you ask? She says, "You don't know what's going on, do you?" I said, "No. What's the problem?" She goes, "They're flying planes into the World Trade Center. I think you're not going to be taking off today."
Oh, man.
And so, sure enough, when I get back to the office, I hear voicemails that the interview's been canceled. It'll be rescheduled. And it was September 11th that my interview was supposed to be scheduled for. So fast
you really
forward to
didn't
October.
have to tell us that detail, but keep going.
Yeah, so in October, we reschedule the interview. I go, and I mentioned to them that, hey, look, I've had this problem when I was a teenager. They tell me my record is expunged, but being the government, I'm sure you have ways to get that information if you want to see it. But I'm being honest with you, this is what I've done. And their question was, do you do it now? And I said, well, not as part of my job as a pen tester, yeah, but I don't do this as, being malicious or, breaking into places unless I'm authorized to, part of my job. So they said, as long as that's fine, you shouldn't have a problem. Fill out your SF-86, which is, if you've ever been involved with the government and getting the clearance, you know that the package is massive. And it took me about a year to get my clearance. And I started at the NSA, I think it was September 23rd, 2002.
Which ironically is my youngest daughter's birthday. just to round things out.
So Terry, from there, and I know knowing people that worked for the agency, right, can talk about probably a little bit of things, but not a whole lot of things. But how did you transition from there to getting involved in what was then probably embedded device security, right, and what we call today IoT and largely ICS security? Yeah.
So one of the things that I credit the agency for is that they have an intern program which allows you to experience various parts of the agency in 6-month intervals.
I think Jeff talked in detail. Jeff did a segment with us, right? Two-part segment about his experiences working for the NSA, and described that intern program, correct?
Yep, I was an intern.
I thought that was going to be a gold record.
So the amazing part that really bothered me when I got in there was that they put me into the intern program for an intelligence analyst. They didn't put me in with all the techie people. And I thought there was a mistake. And so I started doing these internships in the various, what they call shops, the Russian shop, the China shop, the counterterrorism shop. Basically, going through emails, listening to voice cuts, and writing reports. And it's like, this sucks. This is not what I signed up for.
You were earning your stripes, right?
You were painting the fence. You were waxing the car.
I guess.
Wax on, wax off.
Yep.
So what ended up happening was I got to, as part of one of my tours, I got to actually go sit in on a brief over in TAO, which everybody kind of knows about now, where all the cool tech stuff was. And I saw something that blew my mind. And I talked to the team lead there, and I said, this is where I think I need to be. I'd like to do a tour here. And he said, well, why don't you ask your branch chief if you can get forward deployed here during your next rotation. So that's what we ended up doing. Is I still stayed with that particular shop that I was assigned to, but I was forward deployed into TAO. And that's where I start to do my offensive stuff again. And our targets were primarily, embedded devices of terrorists. And we supported a particular SOCOM unit that would rapidly get forward deployed. And it would not be uncommon for these guys to literally come into our shop and say, we're deploying in 30 days. We need a capability that does XYZ against ABC device. And we would bust ass to get something. And it was always command line. There was no pretty GUI or anything like that. And, it's a bunch of bash scripts and Perl, and you cobble it together. Right. And it's like, here you go. Your mileage may vary. If there's a problem, just up arrow, enter, and keep trying until it works. And, that became successful. And our tools got a little more sophisticated. Then the other agencies saw the success our group was having with this military unit. And so the CIA wanted in, the Marshals wanted in, the FBI wanted in on these capabilities. And what stunned me was the NSA's refusal to share anything. So at the time, I didn't understand why. And I looked at that and I was just absolutely flabbergasted. I said, aren't we all in the same war on terror, fighting the same enemy here? Why are we not sharing these capabilities? And they gave various reasons. Give it to the FBI, they use it and they actually apprehend somebody. Now it's part of discovery when it goes to court and it has to be publicly revealed.
I was just going to say the secret is not so much you're doing that stuff. The secret is how, and if that gets disclosed, and then everyone knows exactly how, and then the cat's out of the bag.
Exactly. And their beef, and the NSA's beef with the CIA is, well, they're a bunch of fucking cowboys. They'll go out there, they'll blow the capability, and they won't care.
Right.
Not to mention they have the crypto statue, but that's another topic.
Yeah. Long-standing rivalry. Right? Yep.
So I went to that unit commander we had been supporting, and I said, hey, I got a crazy idea here. If I leave the agency and start a company where we create offensive hacking tools, would you guys buy them? I didn't know anything about government contracting at the time. He said, look, we like what you guys do. You guys have supported us greatly in the past. If you come up with something and I'm still unit commander, I'll definitely give you a fair shot to take a look at it. I may not even be the unit commander when you come up with something, and there's no guarantee that we'll have any budget to buy whatever it is you make, but call me when you have something. So I said, that's all I needed, because I went back to my branch chief and I told him I'm putting in my 2 weeks. And the other thing that made it less risky to go out on my own, I remember my branch chief saying, look, I understand. If you go out, you do it, and it doesn't work, you'll always have a home back here. So that's all I needed. And so I left. February 1st, 2007, I actually started right here in this basement. The walls were pink then. And I developed a close access hacking tool written in Perl that basically leveraged a universal plug and play. I wouldn't call it an exploit. It was the ability to remotely open and close ports and map internal IPs to port numbers.
It's interesting, Terry. In that sense, it's a great way to think of it. Universal plug and play is, in fact, a hacking tool in and of itself by design.
Yeah, because when I read the spec, it's like, oh my God, I can manipulate I can send a packet to manipulate the firewall. It doesn't authenticate or
There's no
ask
authentication,
why or
right?
who you
Yeah. It always just mind-boggling to me. Anyway.
Yeah. So I mean, that's what I love to do at the agency, and that's what I did when I started Tactical Network Solutions. Is I would actually love to read the specifications and look for these anomalies where you can manipulate the protocol to do things that the developers never intended to happen. So that was the first thing that got me started. I went back. The unit commander was there. They liked it. They bought the program, and that launched me into the government contracting space in 2007. And Tactical Network Solutions is still around, still doing offensive stuff for the government, military. We have a lot of training classes on firmware exploitation. So when I was with TNS, we slowly started getting into more firmware-based attacks.
Yeah, and you guys were the sort of the early subject matter experts on reverse engineering firmware.
That's more the doing of Craig Hefner, the creator of Binwalk.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, we leveraged his expertise.
Wait, so how did you meet Craig?
I actually met one of the first long-term government contracts I had was back to the NSA, but this time on the other side of the house working with IAD on the red team. And because I was good at the time with Wi-Fi, one of the things that the red team at the NSA wanted me to help them with was to establish a Wi-Fi pen team for the red team. So that's where I met Craig. Craig worked on the red team over at the NSA.
And IAD, I remember, you mean like internal assessments for government branches and offices?
Yeah, for military bases. So there'd be times when Craig and I and our branch chief back then would actually go out to military bases in a minivan, and I'm sitting in the back of the minivan with a Yagi and an Alpha card, and Craig's on the computer doing his thing, hacking Wi-Fi networks to see if, how secure some of these military bases were. So
Terry, I have to tell you right now, and you may not understand this, but you're welcome.
Yeah. If you listen to Jeff's segments that he did on this show, I get that.
Yeah. You get that.
Yep.
Random NSA question. What are you allowed to say what building you worked in?
I don't know if I'm allowed to say, but I say it anyway because I don't think it really matters anymore now that everything's out on WikiLeaks practically. I was over in the R&E building.
That's where I assumed you were. I was just curious.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Terry, are you based in Baltimore today, or?
We're in Columbia, Maryland.
Okay. Yeah.
So we're right between DC and Baltimore.
Yeah, near Tenable.
Yes. And actually, it was ironic because as we were developing what became ReFirm Labs, this platform to reverse engineer firmware, looking for exploits that we could rapidly, or look for vulnerabilities that we could rapidly develop exploits for our government customers. Ron Gula, when he was still at Tenable, basically came across the way and said, hey, can you guys do what you do with firmware? Can you do it to Docker containers as well? It's like, I don't know. Let's see if we can. So we were working with Tenable there for a little bit on.
Yeah, I remember that. I was at Tenable at the time and actually remember having a conversation with Ron about, I met with those TNS guys. I'm like, those guys are awesome at reverse engineering firmware. So how did you get involved with reverse engineering the firmware? Was it like Craig that turned you on to it? Was it before you wrote Binwalk? Were you both kind of doing the same thing and then started comparing notes?
Yeah, no, he actually developed Binwalk first because he was just dabbling around with reverse engineering on his own. And what we started to discover was that in order to go after these embedded devices, because IoT really wasn't a thing at the time, we ended up getting a government contract from the military that basically said, can you guys find vulnerabilities in these devices? We don't care what type, what brand, what make or model. We just want you to grab as many of these embedded devices, whether it's cameras, routers, cable modems, DSLAMs, the whole 9 yards. If you can get the firmware, can you find vulnerabilities and then create exploits for them so we can stockpile them? It's like, okay, well, let's see what we can do. And as you guys know, if you've played with Binwalk, this is a very manual process.
Yeah.
I mean, all Binwalk does is open up the file, the compressed firmware image into its underlying root file system.
It's really just looking for magic bytes, right?
Yes. So that's just the first part of the process. Then you got to start looking at the individual binaries to see if there's actually problem code in there, whether there's a buffer overflow or a command injection attack that you might be able to leverage.
Well, you're skipping a very critical step in there that I wanted to ask you about, Terry, and that's identifying the file systems that are within that firmware, and the ability to mount those is a painstaking process oftentimes in and of itself, unless you're lucky and it can find that and mount that automatically. But I find that's not always the case, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, Craig's instrumental in developing the open source capabilities to do that. And yeah, I mean, we wouldn't be where we are without Craig. There's no doubt about it. So once you get to that point and you can actually start to look at the binaries and look for vulnerabilities that could be exploited, now you have a trial and error process. Okay, so you found a couple buffer overflows in the HTTP server. You know, now let's start the manual
just happened last week with, was it Netgear disclosed vulnerabilities, and one of them was a buffer overflow in the HTTPD service.
Yes.
That we see it in that. We see it in universal plug and play. We see it in a lot of the Wi-Fi drivers. I mean, it's crazy. But you guys understand that this is a time-consuming process, and be able to meet a customer's demand to have a stockpile of zero-day cyber weapons that they could deploy at a moment's notice. It's like, okay, here's a bullet this week.
Yeah.
3 weeks later, here's another bullet.
Right.
So we need to automate this. I brought the guys in. I said, there's got to be a way we can take Craig's mind, his process, and automate this to some degree. So from like 2008-9, we started incrementally automating this process all the way up to, we were working on it to about 2016, constantly automating the process and delivering capability. We got to the point, believe it or not, where we were delivering so much product to the government customer, they told us to slow down because they could not integrate what we were delivering fast enough into their systems.
Oh, wow.
That's when you knew you had a product that you could sell outside the government, right?
So there was a in the Maryland area, and I think they had some in New York, in Texas. They called them tech breakfast startups. I think they used to be a thing. So we went to one. It was actually right across the street from our office in Columbia, and I did my 7-minute pitch on the platform Centrifuge, and then took Q&A. And usually in the audience, you have people like us that were pitching, you have investors, and then you had people looking for jobs. That was the whole point of the get-together. So I go and I do the pitch. And then on my way out, I get cornered by some investors and said, hey, have you ever thought about using this platform for defensive purposes? And it's like, why the hell would I want to do that? Because as an offensive guy, I only have to be right one time. On the defensive side, it's a little harder. So we played this song and dance for almost 3 months until they, painted a clear picture to us that there is a market out there to use this platform for defensive purposes. They wanted to actually shut down everything TNS was doing and only take the core team and invest in that. And I said, there's no way. We got all these government contracts. We have all these training classes that we do that Craig teaches. We're not going to give that up. So we came to the decision to take the core team, including Craig, and spin out ReFirm Labs into a brand new company, completely separate from any of the government spooky stuff, none of that, and focus only on commercial industry and commercial customers.
Now, Terry, is your customers, are they the folks that make IoT devices, or are they the folks that are implementing them, or is it both?
It is both. Our first customer was AT&T. AT&T is developing Firstnet. And for those of you that aren't aware, Firstnet is a from-the-ground-up communication system for first responders. AT&T is building that. They're not building all the gear. They have other people that are building the gear that is to be placed on to the Firstnet network. And so as part of their vetting process, as part of their security checklist, firmware security is just a part of an overall security policy that they want to have applied to all their vendors in their supply chain. So they've been a customer of ours from the very beginning, and they're vetting all the vendors who want to put their gear on the Firstnet network. And that's actually great, because what ends up happening is that these vendors then get reports from Centrifuge, from AT&T, saying, you need to fix X, Y, and Z because this is vulnerable, or you have some private crypto keys that you actually left in your firmware. You need to fix that before we accept it and put it onto the Firstnet network. Those vendors are like, where are you getting these reports? And so they end up turning into customers as well. And we do have some OEMs and ODMs of consumer devices that have now jumped on the bandwagon, and they're vetting and validating their supply chain, people like Foxconn, to make sure that what they're getting before they put it into the final product is actually as secure as it can be before it goes out the door.
It's interesting. I've been on this kind of kick lately, and I want to go back a little bit in time, Terry, and talk about some of Craig's work. I've been on this thing about favorites, right? Like, my favorite hacker movie's got to be Hackers, right? Because it's about style.
God, are you serious?
The story. Hear me out. My favorite rapper has got to be
youngster,
right? Got to be Biggie, because the presentation and the style and the well-roundedness, right? My favorite embedded device or IoT vulnerability has to be Joel's Backdoor, just because of the style and the story that surrounds that. And that was one that Craig posted on many years ago, but it still sticks in my mind. I still remember Joel's backdoor backwards, I believe, was in the user agent,
Yes.
which gave you remote access to the device, and how it was in the firmware, and there was the Russian forum posting that was referencing it, and that was really all that referenced it if you Google search for it backwards, and the whole thing. And that's my favorite. I don't know if you've got anything you want to share about that particular vulnerability, and then some of your other kind of favorite vulnerabilities in the IoT world.
Actually, I don't have any stories like Craig and then in the Joel's backdoor. I'm surprised you like hackers, dude. If there was ever a movie, I literally walked out on. It was hackers.
It's the soundtrack, it's the costume and the set design. It has style.
It's the movie that introduced the hacker culture.
Oh,
Well,
You're
it's
talking about best
faux.
hacker movie.
Yeah, faux.
Well,
yeah.
somewhat faux, but it's
We don't all
emulated.
wear rollerblades, but believe me.
No matter how much.
But I'm
no matter
gonna
how much
go
you
out
talk
on a
about
limb and say Dennis is probably more war games or sneakers.
yeah, there you go.
Yeah. No, I get that. I just it's the style points that win it for me.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you some of the things that I've found that really blow my mind, and we're continuing to see this today. Hold on.
Got a drink before this, right?
So, at Tactical Network Solutions, let's go back in time to 2013. Okay. Zach was working for us. Zach was on your show. Zach gets a request from a European telephone conglomerate and says, hey, we're thinking about rolling out this new wireless gateway to our customers. Can you take a look at it and see if there's anything suspicious with it?
British Telecom. Sorry. Oh, who said that?
Man, I think I may have one of those BT home hubs.
Right.
Still.
Okay, so you know where this is going. So
Yes.
Zach gets it. We run it through what was kind of a half-assed centrifuge at the time. And he discovers a backdoor that looks pretty, nothing ordinary. It's an engineering test account. Somebody forgot to take it out. Tell the manufacturer, clean it up. Shouldn't have any more problem. So the customer goes back to the manufacturer, tells them what we found, and we wait about 2-3 weeks to get the new firmware image. Get the firmware image, we look, and the backdoor that was discovered isn't where we discovered it. However, it was just simply moved elsewhere in the firmware. So it was still there. And we thought that was really odd. So I talked to the customer and I said, do you mind me asking who the vendor is? And they said it was Huawei. And now, remember, it's 2013.
I didn't know.
No one's really making a stink about Huawei. Nobody even knows who the hell Huawei is at this time.
Right. We didn't know how to pronounce it back then, for sure.
So I kind of put that in the back of my mind. Fast forward here to 2017. As ReFirm's getting ready to come out of stealth mode, we get approached by a chief digital security officer at a large Fortune probably 50 company who had an Intel background, kind of knew of what we did and what we're capable of, and said he had concerns about these Chinese-made cameras that are all over the company's properties, not only there at the headquarters, but around the world. Can you guys take a look at the firmware in these cameras? Because I know I have enough dirty knowledge. I don't have enough technical knowledge to make my case that these need to be replaced. Sure, we'll take a look at it. So we look at the firmware. What do you know? This time we find a back door. However, this one's a little more obfuscated. It was difficult to find. We put it through Centrifuge, and Centrifuge popped out a potential vulnerability that we needed to look at. And so we actually had to manually look at it, and we gave it to Craig. And Craig said, yeah, this update D service looks suspicious. And sure enough, he was able to find a hard-coded backdoor in there. And now what we're talking about here are Dahua cameras, China's second largest surveillance camera manufacturer behind Hikvision. And Wall Street Journal broke a story a year or so ago that Hikvision's owned is owned by the Chinese government, I think 42%. So it's like, okay, well, let's tell our customer what we found and tell him that, he needs to be on the lookout for anything suspicious. So we sent him our information. And guys, I kid you not, within about 36 hours, he sends me a text message and he literally says, you guys were fucking spot on. And he sends me a snippet of the firewall log showing network traffic being exfilled out of the cameras, going to Chinese IP addresses they didn't recognize. So they immediately blocked that traffic. And within about 3 weeks, they ended up ripping out and replacing all the Dahua cameras around the world. I asked him if we could go public with this, and he said, sure, go ahead, without naming him in the company. So in 2017, we put out our vulnerability report. We covered 5 products, but we focused primarily on the Dahua.
I think I remember
we tried to
reading that
contact
report.
Dahua. Nobody got back in touch with us. Once it was in the Post and Fortune and Forbes and some others, then Dahua contacted us, told us we looked at the wrong firmware. There's an updated version. Go download it, and sends me a link. Come on. Was I born yesterday? Are you an idiot? I'm not going to click on your link. So I had the guys look on Dahua's.
Wait. They contacted you and they tried to phish you. That's what you're saying.
Pretty much.
It's like, what?
And even if they hadn't, do you think they fixed that firmware that
Right.
was new? I mean, Jesus.
Come on. So, we actually find it ourselves on their website. But if it was truly an update firmware that was meant to be downloadable for customers to deploy, they didn't make it easy to find. Okay. So we got the firmware and we unpacked it. Again, the same kind of signature profile showed up. So we gave it to Craig to manually go through and dig through it. And sure enough, the exact same thing happened. Where in the firmware we found it no longer existed. However, this time it was moved elsewhere in the firmware. And we confronted Dahua with the disassembly, the IDAPRO printouts and everything, saying, it is not removed. It is right here. It's plain as day. What's your explanation? And they come back to me and say, well, my developer or engineer or whoever told me that this has been removed, it's taken care of. And my email response to him was, are you sure he works for you and not your government? And I never heard another word from Dahua. And so here's the thing I want to leave people with. Now, these are 2 data points, but I think it's very interesting that you have the same kind of tools, tactics, techniques that are being deployed here, where you kind of put in a firmware, a backdoor in a firmware, somebody discovers it, oh, we made a mistake, here's the new version, you look and it's just moved elsewhere. Now remember, 2013, it was kind of plain as day, it looked like an accident. This time, it was a little more obfuscated and harder to find, but we found it anyway. You got 2 Chinese companies, you got one that's in the telecom space, you got one that's in the surveillance camera space, both deploying the same types of tools, tactics, techniques, and you're trying to tell me that's a coincidence? I don't think so.
That's really interesting. It makes me just want to block all access from outgoing to China, right?
And we didn't even
Then your
start
TikTok won't
talking
work.
about TikTok.
Yeah, and then your
exactly.
IoT device
How are you
won't
going
work.
to do that once they go to IPv6, though?
Right?
Oh, baby. Yeah. No, I was going to say we didn't even start talking about TikTok.
Oh, God.
Oh, anyway. Sorry about
Oh gosh, look at the time.
that. Yeah.
So, Terry, in your estimation, and I've spoken with a lot of different people since the time I was really kind of heavy into firmware reverse engineering and just finding plethoras of vulnerabilities, even though I didn't have advanced tooling like you do, right? You can find these vulnerabilities, and we still find them today. But what's the answer? How do we get device manufacturers, the China thing kind of aside, how do we get device manufacturers to make more secure devices?
There's been a debate going on amongst industry and within Congress. Is this a government issue? Do we need to actually have regulations? Do we need to have penalties? Personally, I think if you start hitting people in the pocketbooks where they have to pay, they're going to pay attention too. I think, I'm not a big fan of standards and frameworks and
compliance,
certifications and all that kind of stuff, because it's just all these things do is protect you, the developer, the manufacturer, the OEM, ODM, that says, I checked the box, I did what I was told, you still got hacked, it's not my fault. I don't believe in, NIST and all these IoT organizations that are springing up with their standards and their frameworks and best practices. Sure, it's a start, but until you start punching people in the gut with money and making it hurt, they're not going to pay attention. So I really don't know what the answer is other than to make them pay literally. I do have a radical idea, and that is if you're developing firmware, you're a developer, and you're working on critical infrastructure, I think as a software developer, you should be licensed. You have to be licensed to practice law. You have to be licensed to practice medicine. Yeah. You have to be licensed to drive a freaking car. If you're going to be developing firmware for critical infrastructure where people can die, I think you need to be licensed to show that you can actually code securely. Because what we see is nothing but shitty, sloppy code in all of these IoT devices everywhere we look. It's like looking back in the 1990s of Windows 95. I mean, the stuff is just crap.
Do you think?
And even better, no memory protections like we're seeing with our modern operating systems. So
it's
hacking like it's 1999 all over again.
Do you think that underwriting takes us back around to that though, where like I mean you've seen that through history with fire codes and things like that. If you as an enterprise can't get underwriting for your facilities because you're using devices that are considered insecure, they haven't been tested, they're just random, that is sort of a money punch as well to hit people with.
I think you're onto something because the insurance industries. I literally spent 2 weeks in London at the headquarters of Aon to talk about how our platform could be utilized as part of an underwriting process for cyber insurance.
Right.
They didn't get it.
Right.
They didn't get it. Maybe I was
changing.
Talking too techie.
That's changing, I'm telling you, because I've seen that with some of my clients and looking at things like the way that companies insure fire. When they look at devices and they say, you're going to put these non-compliant, very dangerous devices in, your rates are going to go through the roof. You can do it, but we're going to make you pay for it through underwriting. And I've been advocating the same thing, which is that IoT creates a huge hole in your organization's infrastructure. And if you're going to cyber insure somebody, you need to make sure those devices are not going to be the point of failure.
Absolutely. And if you have actually dealt with any of these underwriters or these carriers that are peddling cyber insurance, I was stunned to realize that when they go out to underwrite somebody for a cyber insurance policy, they don't even do a pen test.
Right.
I was floored. I couldn't believe that.
But those things are changing in the industry, I think, as well as that matures. I've certainly seen that. You're right; it's very fledgling right now, and you see all kinds of crazy policies being written, and they just don't test anything. They use this sort of actuarial idea that we'll give you a policy for $500,000 and we won't test anything. But you are seeing that change in high dollar operations because it's going to have to change as people get bigger and bigger losses.
It's interesting. I'm sorry. Coincidentally, I was on a panel yesterday talking about cyber insurance. Chris Roberts invited me to be on the panel, and pretty much everybody on the panel was an insurance salesman. There was one lawyer, and then Chris had me on, and he was the moderator. So I'm like, okay, I'm the foil, obviously.
No.
Yeah. But in just hearing what you were just saying about the need for insurance to basically either make it cost more to insure or make it so you can't be underwritten, it's really a variation of a theme of what you were saying just a moment ago, where instead of it's the government and it's applying a cost through the government, through regulation. It's really a variation on a theme. It makes me wonder, is it more palatable to go the insurance route than it is to go through the government regulation route? Because, I mean, both are, you have to demonstrate in theory that you're meeting some minimal threshold. If not, you pay more or it costs you.
I think it's more efficient because it costs the insurance company if they screw up. So they have a built-in incentive to come out there and pen test and make sure these things are correct. Whereas the government says, well, I'm going to certify this or I'm going to certify that. They don't certify these things. But that insurer is going to get hurt if they have to pay out. So they're going to want it to be right.
Well, I agree with going down the insurance angle, and I sincerely think that is an untapped market, especially for a company like us to try and exploit, no pun intended. But where does that leave you and I as consumers? How do you force that type of model onto the Linksys, the Netgears, the Buffaloes, the TrendNets of the world to take security seriously? I mean, where's the insurance angle there to make those guys feel the pain too?
Well, yeah, and Terry, and that's where I somewhat disagree with making the companies literally pay, right? Because in a lot of circumstances, Facebook as an example, when they do have to pay fines, it's like drop in the bucket, sucker, right? And then they're also going to do the math thing that I think Ford did, right, when their cars were catching fire, and go, do we cost us more money to fix the problem than it does to pay the lawsuits, right? It's the same thing. We're saving so much money by using these devices from China that, the fact that my insurance goes up is some accountant's going to do some math and go, yeah, you know what, we're better off doing the Chinese thing. The way to really hurt them is to hurt their sales and influence buyers. But we've all seen how difficult that is to influence the buyer, whether it's an enterprise or whether it's a consumer, to go, well, I want the one that's more expensive because it's more secure.
But what you described there, Paul, is a risk assessment. Mm-hmm. And you may not like it, but companies that risk assessment came from the financial side of things, the accounting side of the world. What costs us more, to do the right thing or to pay the fines for not doing the right thing?
It's always going to be there, right? It's a constant.
There's nothing at face value wrong with that. Where we have a problem with it is when it costs people lives and cost our especially if we're the customer, our life, our livelihood, our privacy, our security. But it is a risk assessment, and you have to I'm not endorsing it, but you have to acknowledge that is what we've set people up to do. We're always telling people, do a risk assessment. Risk assessment at the end of the day is what's going to cost us more, what's going to cost us less.
Terry, where are we with influencing the consumer or the enterprise in their purchasing process?
I don't think we're anywhere near we should be in terms of influencing the consumer, because honestly, I don't think the consumer gives a shit. Okay.
They don't. More so than 10 years, but more so than 10 years ago, though.
Yeah. I mean, people look, honestly, being in the government, the OPM breach, I mean, what privacy do I have left? I mean, you got the Equifax breach, you have the OPM breach, and for OPM, especially for us in the Intel community or have Intel backgrounds, not only do you have like our 5-10 year history of every place we've ever lived and our relations on both sides of our families, but you even have our freaking fingerprints. I mean, what privacy is left for me? So I really don't care anymore. I can see how people can just give up and say, take whatever you want. It's a lost cause. Now, in terms of industry, commercial industry, I mean, thank God we have people like AT&T who's pushing back on their supply chain, saying we're not going to accept this unless it meets our internal security checklist. And unfortunately for them, firmware is one small part of their overall security program. But, without the big companies pushing back on the smaller, companies in the supply chain, it's going to be a tough road to hoe unless, like we were talking, insurance is a way to make these people actually wake up and smell the coffee. Or we have some catastrophic event that happens, which can be successfully traced back to a flaw in firmware.
You mean like the Mirai botnet?
Yeah.
Even something more, because see, I don't even
We're thinking bigger than Mirai. I agree, because the flaw was passwords, and maybe that wasn't enough.
I mean, let's take, for example, are you guys familiar with Sonatype?
Yes.
Okay.
The company?
So Sonatype, they're in the business of keeping tabs on security patches and vulnerabilities in open source libraries and projects and stuff like that. And if you're a developer and you subscribe to their system, you get updates of, when patches are released and what vulnerabilities are discovered and all that kind of stuff. So you're in the know. They had a hard time gaining traction until the Equifax breach. Then their sales took off, and now they're a multi-billion-dollar company, I think. So unless a catastrophic event happens at the firmware level that can successfully be traced back to firmware and a flaw in firmware, I don't think people are really going to care that much about the security of their IoT devices in their home.
But when that turns into
huge.
Hold on.
Go ahead, Larry.
No, sorry. It's got to be huge. I mean, Mirai was big, but it really didn't affect all that many people for very long. I mean,
right.
So I couldn't get on eBay, or I couldn't watch Netflix for a couple hours. Big deal, whoop-de-doo.
Exactly.
And you won't win that. But if there's any real pain from these small end devices, so you can end up with a class action lawsuit with 10 million people signed onto the class action lawsuit, because when you get that letter in the mail that says, hey, did you suffer downtime in your life due to this router that you bought being compromised? Did you lose passwords and have to go change all your bank account information?
But I think the problem with that is in the IoT space, there are so many different devices, so many different processor types, hardware platforms, and different types of firmware that getting any one large section of people, like even if you got everyone that used Netgear, that's still just a drop in the bucket, right? And Terry, I'm sure you've had lots of conversations about this too, right? It's the ubiquitous nature of IoT devices and the diversity of technology that almost hurts us from a security sense, because there's no one common thing where we can have the big Equifax breach, right? Or the big worms running around in Windows in the early 2000s, right?
I'll tell you what needs to happen. We need to have, unfortunately, for people to pay attention and for government to pay attention, you need a 3 Mile Island type of problem that can be traced back to an IoT or an embedded device. Then people will wake up.
I was gonna interject something similar. First comment, we're still talking about make them pay. We've now got government regulation. We've got insurance, and now we're talking basically litigation. It's still the way that we motivate is by from a risk assessment perspective, making it more costly to not do the right thing. I was going to interject simply, and to sort of tie in your backstory, not necessarily a 3 Mile Island event, but a 9/11 type of event, because while you were almost getting to be interviewed by NSA, I was done with NSA out in the private sector. Also didn't get on a plane that day that I was supposed to be going up into that area. But, the one up until that point in this fledgling, cybersecurity industry, and we didn't call it that back then, it was all FUD. It was all the hypothetical bad things can happen. You need to pay attention to us. And for a brief moment, we could look and we could point at something and say, that's the kind of bad thing that could happen that nobody ever thinks of, and some people dream about and hypothesize, but how do you protect yourself from that? And it wasn't even the lesson of the loss of life in the near term. It was all the companies that were doing business out of the World Trade Center, and how did they stay in business, and there was quite a few companies that just never came back because not only did their people disappear, but they had no ability from a disaster recovery perspective to recover from that type of event where they didn't have backups, they didn't have warm sites, backup sites, they didn't have anything in their infrastructure. It was all at the World Trade Center.
Yep.
Terry,
all that to say is money. Money is the only thing that talks, and I would put forth maybe we need to, as much as the hacking security community hates to hear about government regulation, that seems to be like the most reasonable course to make anything happen.
Right. I like to use positive. I like positive reinforcement, right? We try and do that with our kids and stuff, right? But in this particular situation, it doesn't work. Terry, sorry, you had a comment.
No. I was just going to say, I'm for government intervention and regulation as long as there are teeth behind it. If there's no enforcement ability and no penalty applied, it's a waste of everybody's time.
Agree.
It's useless.
And we also can't stifle innovation and entry into the market with regulation too. So it's a balancing act. Agree. Terry, a form of like positive reinforcement, what are your thoughts on similar frameworks to Azure Sphere as a platform to deploy IoT devices securely? Do you think that's, one, a viable option, and two, how do we increase adoption of these frameworks and processes?
I think Microsoft, I've been most of my life a Microsoft basher, but I think Microsoft is doing the right thing when it comes to IoT. I mean, just look at the M&A activity that Microsoft's been engaged with, buying up all these, smaller IoT security type companies. I think they see the writing on the wall. They're taking it very seriously, and I applaud them for that.
And the Xbox platform awesome. Too, right? I mean, they borrowed from the Xbox platform to create Azure Sphere, right? And largely we don't see widespread, hacks of the Xbox platform. It's just a solid design for both performance, functionality, as well as security.
Yeah, I mean, Microsoft is on the right path here. They're on the right track. I give them credit for. I think they're actually ahead of the curve on this. Like I said, they're out there aggressively courting companies and doing acquisitions and filling gaps where they don't have the internal talent to tackle that particular problem. So, yeah, one, they're on the right track. Two, how do you get more people to adopt this? I mean, that's going to come down to marketing. I mean, it's plain and simple. It's going to be marketing and getting the message out there that this is the way that things need to be, the way that things it should be, and so that's I think that falls to a marketing department actually. Mm-hmm.
Any more questions for Terry?
Maybe 5.
Yes, Terry, you ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
Oh God, okay.
3 words to describe yourself.
Extrovert, energetic, and personable.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
Knife.
If you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
Hacker Gone Wild.
In the popular game of Ask Grabby Grabby, do you prefer to go first or second?
Go first.
Choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Alive, dead, fiction, or otherwise.
Oh, God.
That's one.
The Griswolds.
The Griswolds. Russ! I do it my son all the time.
Bravo.
Terry, thank you so much for appearing on Paul's Security Weekly.
Sure, anytime.
With that, we'll take a short break, come back, cover the news for this week. Stay tuned.